Whoa. All right. Camera does a weird thing where it's trying to help me focus, and I look like I look very washed out at the moment. Welcome to the show. Part 2, Act 1, Act 2, Part 1 of my look at Worlds Without Number. In particular, it's tools for creating campaigns and whatnot. Let me pull it up again. This is where we left off. If you tuned in yesterday, this is where we left off. Bada bing, onto nation construction. So if you remember before, they call it backdrops, these different levels of detail from your global level to your regional level, and then what they're calling, I would call more of a local level. They call it kingdom level, whatever. The words aren't particularly important as long as you get the gist of it. Now we went through that, generated, you could potentially generate some terrain, generate some significant features and that sort of thing. Now we're moving into, I guess we're going to talk about nations and constructing them. I will read, so just to reiterate what I said last time, I'm going to not necessarily go like I've done in other read-throughs where I literally read through every paragraph. There's a lot here. I'm going to try to be a little bit more succinct. I have not read this ahead of time, so this is not edited for your enjoyment or mine. But I'm going to try to be a little bit more selective with what I read, just to maximize our time, since these are probably going to be split up into 1 hour-ish blocks. So I want to get the most I can. Hopefully I can do like last time where I'm able to get through kind of a whole section in a nice, tidy hour time frame. But I will read this intro underneath for that. Yeah, I will read the intro that begins this nation construction setting. When following the guide on page 118, that's just the stuff we covered in the other stream, so you can go back and check that out if you need a refresher. Sometimes a little extra flavor or a few more specific details are needed for a nation. These pages offer some guidelines and examples. The disputes, positive ties, current problems, and present felicities suggested on the opposite page can be used to provide a hint about current national concerns, while the nation themes that follow might be used to color the societies that you place there. Beyond those random tables, there are also a few more material qualities to a nation that require a little more guidance to establish. Okay. So these are essentially building upon the stuff that was the things that were already covered in the last bit, right? So guidelines, help, prompts, potentially for fleshing out the things that we established about nations, large groups, cultures, potentially. So first we have borders. Borders should generally follow rivers, mountain ranges, trackless forests, and other major geographic barriers, right? I mean, I think up until and I think this is mostly true throughout history, only when people, for deliberate reasons, messed with that, where you'd find these just straight lines that just cut across whatever. But usually, right, you're going to stop at a place that makes sense. And those kinds of barriers, especially I think if there are sort of forbidding forests and wide rivers and things like that, it makes sense to stop there. Population density is skewed both by the perilous aratu, those are those alien outsiders, and the occasional pocket of ultra-dense habitation made possible by ancient sorceries or still functional workings with a capital W. For a general baseline population for a relatively low-tech, low-magic land of unremarkable prosperity, you can assume 60 people per square mile of non-wilderness, or 2,000 per 6-mile hex. I like that. It's a good rule of thumb, right? When you're looking at your 6-mile hex and you want to know how many people, you can try to break it out per square mile. And a 6-mile hex is somewhere at, I don't know, it's 31-ish. You could just say, I guess, between 30 and 32, somewhere in there. I don't remember the exact number, so apologies for that. But you could either break it out like that, or you could look at it and say, well, this hex is mostly non-wilderness, So between all the little villages and perhaps a major town, you're looking at 2,000 people. And you can cut it up, divide it however you want, right? Tiny little hamlets. Then you might have a market town or market village, and maybe you have one larger town. And then, of course, potentially a city, if you've got one in there. Urbanization. For most nations of the latter Earth, that's the setting here, their setting in particular, at least 90% of the population will be rural. They will live in small villages of a few hundred people, if not fewer, with the occasional somewhat larger market town. The more productive the agriculture of the nation, the greater the percentage that will be able to live in an urban life. So, right, this is, I think, your standard boilerplate medieval fantasy type deal. I think it's good to reiterate that because I think people forget, and they'll make massive cities, and then you think, well, where are all the farms, or other things like that. And granted, like the rivers must only join and never split when moving towards the sea, it can get overdone, and there's no reason why you can't think of it. So, yeah, I want to have some massive city here. But then something to think about in terms of just for the fiction, or just, how is this city supported? If you're going to have some massive, makes Waterdeep look like a tiny village, massive city in here, how is it getting supplied with food and potable water and all these other things that they need, not to mention sewage and that stuff, but just on this kind of food and water aspect, right? How is it being supplied? And that you can come up with some neat stuff, whether it's just traditional, it's being brought in from the countryside, or being brought in from the oceans, depending on the culture, or probably both, or whether there's magic or some other means. You've got druids chained throughout the city that just do goodberry, like vending machines, right? There's lots of options for you to do, but it's a good thing to think about, because those are the kind of things I think. Some stuff I think, like the rivers splitting versus joining, I think mostly when you're in the fiction, the players are never really going to think about it. They're not even going to see mostly a zoomed out view where it's even apparent that they're passing over a river that's joining and or splitting instead of joining, whatever nonsense. But these other concerns actually could get in the game, because players might rightfully ask questions so they can take advantage of. Okay, well, maybe we need to sneak in. So we need to sneak in this big city. Well, where are all the wagons bringing in food? And if there aren't, that's going to strike them as odd, and you'll want to have something for that. Otherwise, you're going to lose that immersion. That what's the other word that they used a lot when dealing with films? It's called suspension of disbelief. You're in this fantasy world, but there's enough things you can kind of latch onto, so you can sort of, that idea that on a basic level, of course, you don't believe in any of this stuff, whether you're taking part of it in a D&D or OSR or whatever role-playing game, or whether you're watching a movie, but there's enough context that makes sense that you can put that disbelief aside and immerse yourself in the fiction. And the same thing, this is usually talked about in terms of movies and TV and things like that, but it's also true in the game. And the more you can build up that context, the more your players will be able to immerse themselves in it. So the questions of how do you feed giant cities, why is a giant city where it is, and does that make sense somehow in a way that's sensible to the players? You may have a reason for it in the back of the bowels of your GM notebook, but if it's not visible or surfaceable to the players, it doesn't really do them any good. Project Work, hey, how you doing? Are we making a game scenario? Not yet. I think for the game scenario, my idea, which I mentioned at the end of the last stream, my current conception is to go through all these tools and then try to put something together with the tools at the end. So I'm going to try to go through all the pieces first. So I'm just, I just got kind of on a little bit of a tangent maybe about urbanization. But I like that they give you some guidelines. So they have some more sort of hard figures, if that's what you want. If you have a nation of 100 miles square and 600,000 people, 20,000 would live in the capital, 10,000 would live in the second largest city, and the remaining 30,000 urbanites would be split into as many as 10 minor cities and major market towns. I do like that they give you some numbers. Those are handy, and you could take those numbers and convert them into some kind of die roll, right? Some kind of dice. I don't know, 6 times 100,000, or however you want to do it. It's gone. Now we get to city placement. put the nation's capital in the central region of the map or the richest farming terrain unless there's a particular reason why the borders expanded rapidly in a particular direction. Locate it on a river or seacoast because any city of its size will require constant food imports that would be prohibitively difficult to haul overland, right? So those are good things, right? You think of the intercoastal in the United States that connects towns on the eastern seaboard, I think, all the way from New England down to Florida. Similar things like that. And you think of Paris and London all on major rivers. I think most giant cities have some sort of water access because, like they're saying, it is immensely difficult to bring in tons of things, especially if they're heavy on land, unless you're using magic or you have Tarrasques as your beast of burden, purple worms maybe pulling sledges. It's rough to do. Okay, so I guess that's when placing cities, put them near resource sites, good farmlands, trade crossroads, or excellent ports. I think that's kind of just go over pretty much repeating what they already said. But the idea here is you think about what reasons is the city there. Terrence says, or Venice, which is in the water. Right. And I think if I'm recalling the little bit of that history of that place, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I think part of why Venice is on the water was it originally was swampland, I think leading into the sea, but that they were actually trying to escape from, I don't know if it was one of the Gothic tribes or whatnot, and they were sort of pushed into the swamps, and they ended up just building it from there and building it and ended up becoming Venice. So there was actually a real practical concern for why they got on the water, which is that they were pushed over. They were pushed to that extremity. But I think that's right, or at least right-ish. All right, so next on the thing we had, list on the, I guess, the list of guidelines here, marking wastelands. A land with no empty spaces and no regions of dubious law is lacking certain charms to adventurers. It's true, right? Your players are operating as adventurers, which is usually on the edges of the law on one side or the other. So you need those sorts of edgy places. You need the Moss Isleys and things where they can connect with others of like kind. When building a nation, you'll want to know where to place forbidding ancient ruins, desolate lost cities, rabid bandit kings. No, rabid, but I do like the idea of a bunny bandit king. And hard-bitten frontier settlers. And I would say here, you don't have to have literal frontiers like in the Old West sense, but anywhere where you're near stuff that's really dangerous, you're going to have people who are driven there or see some kind of opportunity for money, much like your adventurers, or because they're doing things they aren't supposed to be doing, you put yourself in a spot that people don't want to go to. You're out of the way. You're out of the eye. So the reasons to have frontier-ish settlements, even if technically you don't have a frontier, but you might have a, for lack of a better word, like a Sherwood Forest type situation where you have some, in this case, he was a good bandit, but a forest that's known to be sort of scary and forbidding. So you might have people who carve out little areas in there to live or make moonshine or do whatever, thinking or knowing and hoping that they can avoid whatever's bad in the woods at the same time as the reputation and just the force of that evil or whatever it is. If only the rumor is keeping at bay the things you're trying to stay away from. Okay, let's see. Look at your map and the cities you've placed. Identify the most likely routes of travel or trade between them. In all probability, the connections are by water when possible, and overland only when there are no canals or navigable waterways connecting them. Speaking of canals, I don't think people hit up canals enough. I think canals and those kind of constructed waterways. I think they're useful. I think certainly if you're looking at a society that's old and been there a long time, I think they would certainly have some system like that, but you don't usually think of it too much. It doesn't, I don't see that in a lot of fantasy maps. Like, here's the canal. It doesn't happen, but there should. Canals, waterways. I think they have them up and down. I think, England and Britain, right? I think they have a lot of those. And obviously in the U.S., the intercoastal is kind of a system like that. And of course you have literal canals. Okay, so I think that's all right. So you're trying to mark out some rough and tumble dangerous spots, and now we get to this, which it didn't really set up very well. Hold on a minute, let me just go backwards. All right, so it's throwing us a bunch of tables. On this particular page, we have Frederick Orr says the UK has a great canal system. There you go. Yeah, I wasn't sure if they were canals or waterways or both. I've only seen them in photos and in fiction and things, not in real life. But yeah, I've seen it. It's pretty cool. I mean, just the pictorially, I've seen pictures and whatnot. And they seem very cool. But I didn't want to speak out of turn and call them canals when I didn't know if they were canals. So thanks for that clarification. Okay, so we've got disputes with neighboring states. So these are, I'm guessing these are all sort of prompts, things you might want to roll on if you need some inspiration. I'm just going to read through them. These are all D20 tables. Top left, disputes with the neighboring state. So we need some conflict in there. So here we can roll something up. Raiders are taking refuge on their lands. Ownership of a resource site is disputed. A usurper or criminal is being sheltered. There's a troublemaking religion. Their rulers have a political claim on presuming the nation in question's throne. A diplomatic marriage is going bad or gone bad. A past war has left deep scars. Their culture is usurping the local beliefs. Their immigrants are gaining influence. They broke off some kind of alliance or pact. They lured away an academy or temple. They're blocking trade through abuse of border tariffs and taxes. They pushed some kind of terrible beast into this land. There's one of those capital W workings. It's causing issues. They awoke some kind of great peril. They're cooperating with an enemy group. They're suspected of backing an assassination or assassination attempt. There's a spy ring that's been found. They refuse to give aid for something, or they've been hostile to an ally. So those are all fairly standard, right? Standard reasons for being angry. And the funny thing is, a lot of those you could work in, right? What if the party was adventuring in that other kingdom or nation or land or whatever, and it's the party that woke up a great peril? Or, of course, what's always nice is if an antagonist has woken up a great peril, but happens to be over there, and maybe that land did push it in. But you can have a lot of fun with thinking about how the party and the stuff that's happening in your campaign is setting off these kind of disputes. Maybe that neighboring state didn't waken the peril legitimately. It wasn't like state agents went and, hey, wake up, psst, you, dangerous thing, wake up, right? But the party or an antagonist of the party or allies of the party or their antagonists, they did it, and that nation just has to deal with it or doesn't, depending on what that terrible thing does, but it's out now. All right, so now we'll go to the top right. Positive ties with the neighboring state. All right, the ruling classes are related. An important faith crosses borders. They're fought in some past conflict. They've got an admired culture. They helped overcome some kind of peril. They held back an enemy. They have the same ethnic origin. They provide critical trade. They are a good supply of sages and scholars. They gave aid during a disaster. One of our heroes came from there. A past hero king ruled both places. They have some kind of resource that is vital. They have a shared enemy. They have one of their capital W workings is helping the kingdom. They have an alliance or trade pact. They recently gave up some disputed land. They greatly admire this culture. They're considered unusually attractive. They got the look. They took in some refugees. So basically the flip side of what could be disputed could also be positive. Then we have so now we're in the bottom left, we're looking at what could the current national problems of this area be. Farmlands being depleted. There's vermin, swarms of vermin. There's rebels stirring up stuff. There is outside powers that are backing internal ne'er-do-wells, distracted or inept leadership. There's a religious reformer. There's some kind of evil that's provoking rioting. There are dark cults, a blighted horde, an ancient ruin has belched out some kind of malevolence. Some malcontents have captured an artifact. There's some sort of, they call it luxuriance, but I think of kind of decadence, right, has caused the rulers or the elites to have emptied the nation's coffers. You have local aristocrats trying to break free. An important mine has run out or been harmed. There's a sinister favorite has caught the eye of the leader. There's hunger issues, fearsome monsters. War is on the horizon. Some kind of grand plan is exhausting the people. If you think something like the Great Wall, right, some kind of big work, whether it's good or bad, is exhausting the populace beyond their abilities to recover. And there is some kind of grudge between lords that's broken out. Hey, Slush Bubs, how you doing? What you got here? Started messing around with this yesterday after my first video. It seems really useful for what I'm working on currently. Great. I mean, that's what I hope, right? That these readings give people ideas to, if it's something they're going to use, to grab it. Awesome. Happy to hear it. Yeah, it seems like a lot of cool things in here. So I'm glad to hear that. All right. So then the last table, good things happening right now. So we had the negative. Now we had the positive. Just found a new splendid mine or resource. There's been a pious saint at work. There's a noble heir. A major rival has gone down. We've gotten some new farmland. We opened up a new trade route. There was the monster's been driven off. We've got rich, great harvests. A wicked minister's been deposed. There's a new academy. An uprising has been crushed. Rival lords have made peace. An old enemy has made peace. The military has won. And a new working has been activated. That's a positive one. An artifact has been activated, I guess, so to speak. Some kind of unrest has been calmed down. And a dark cult has been purged. New diplomatic ties have been made. And a new lord has risen that was loved by his people. Right. So these are all great things. And the other thing, too, is, again, kind of like with the neighboring state stuff, these are all great ideas for how to work in what your party is doing with what's happening in that level around or above them. So you could see how a bandit or rebel uprising has been crushed, a new academy has been opened, a minister has been deposed, a monster has been slain. I mean, really, almost all of them could be the result of adventures. I could look at these and say, not only are these things that are going on, these are also adventure hooks. I need to flesh them out, but it will depend on what the party wants to do as players and as characters and what they're able to do. But trying to find a new trade route somewhere. Maybe there's a pass mountains and there hasn't been a good working pass for a while now. Can they find something that's not so treacherous? Right, that could be one. If the party is getting into domain building, maybe you look at and say, instead of a wizard's tower or something of that nature, opening up an academy. You could tie that to a class or anybody. Hey, you want to build a castle? Great. But if you do an academy, whether it's a fighting academy, whether it's a military academy or an arcane academy or whatever, like, hey, that will bring up the I don't want to say the morale of the nation you're in, and potentially if you want to have some kind of resource that is tracking what the party's doing and their standing, so to speak, those could be ways. So we see a lot of, obviously the good stuff tends to be the results potentially of adventures, and the bad stuff is definitely hooks for adventures, but you don't have to make them there. You can have them in the background if the party decides to activate on one of those, they can. Otherwise, there's other things. So it's I think it's nice that they have sort of, and I'm sure, I mean, obviously, I don't know if they have to be designed for that dual purpose. That just makes sense that all of these things are sort of fodder, or you could consider rewards for adventuring, or at least the consequences of adventuring. Now we're going to get some example nation themes. All right, so these are just really suggestions, could be positive or negative, but we should remember that the themes of the nation should be related to actual playable content. There you go. A seemingly idyllic land with traits of justice and pageantry might be splendid in many ways, but something about those qualities should cause problems or conflicts that adventuring PCs could become embroiled in. Right, so you're avoiding the fairy tale kingdom where nothing is wrong. We need stuff to be wrong, or at least not right, or at least have cracks in the facade so that the party can wedge their knives into those cracks and either break them apart or put putty on it in those knives, and seal them up. But either way, it's not much to do in the perfect place. And knowing that the party is going to be looking for wrongs to right or just opportunities to make change, you need to have those opportunities. Let's see. What do they say? So, okay, so we're just going to get down to some themes. So I'll read through the bullet points. Let me know in the chat if any of these seem more interesting or others. We have barbarism. I'll just read the bit about that because, the word's a little bit, maybe there's not a better word, and they don't, well, I guess they do. Well, I don't know, because I always troubled by that word because a people like Conan the Cimmerian, it's Conan the Barbarian, right? But Conan would not consider himself a barbarian. The peoples of Aquilonia would consider Conan a barbarian. It makes a little bit more sense here because you're talking about in terms of what the nation perceives. Like the Romans perceived all kinds of the Gallic and Germanic peoples as barbarians. Ancient China, I think they pretty much looked at everybody outside of China itself as being basically barbaric. And I'm similar feelings throughout the known world, where one culture feels themselves to be at the apex of civilization, and everyone else they're thumbing their nose to and saying you're essentially animals. So what do they say about barbarism here? The nation is brutally assailed by bestial, primitive forces, whether from external enemies or internal divisions. Naked violence, cruelty, ignorance, and hatred are always near the surface of things. So it's an interesting mix of kind of you could consider it internal barbarism if you think about things that a culture may do which are just terrible to their own people, but also think of things that could come from the outset. Here they're specifically talking about bestial primitive forces. I'm not sure what those could be, but it could be. I don't tend to think of barbarism as coming from just straight up animals. But of course, whatever, animals, monsters, where you draw the line between what's an animal, what's a monster in particular. I don't know. All the same. One man's animals, one man's monster. Terrence says, we have a dress code in this kingdom, you scruffy hooligans. You're under arrest. Yeah, it could be it, right? Certainly from an adventure point of view. It's interesting to think about from whose point of view are they barbaric? Are they barbaric internally, which would seem to be that they're being assailed by outside forces, or are they themselves barbaric from the point of view of the players? This is why I don't love the term barbarism. It's just a little bit, I don't know, imprecise maybe in a way, and it just covers a lot of ground, but there it is. That's what they're using. Then we have decadence, which I think makes more sense. Or I mean, it's more, I think we all kind of have an idea what it is to be decadent. It could be in despair. They could be enlightened. They could be exhausted. They could be expansive, hopeful, ignorant. And we have a nice D20 table that runs through a bunch of these, which I think are the same ones here. Just if we just want to roll a die, we could do it, or we could read through the things. We also have justice, legitimacy, oppression, pageantry, poverty, precarity, prosperity, renewal, stratification, triumph, unity, and violence. And these are just, of course, just examples. You can make whichever ones you like that work for you, right? These are just giving you some guidelines, giving you some starting, somewhere to start from. Now we get to society construction. All right, this should be fun. A nation is the product of its society. While you can easily sketch the borders of a particular fantastic domain on a map, the more difficult part of the process is thinking about the kind of people who live there, the things they value, and the way they organize their lives will have inevitable consequences when thinking about their government, their conflicts, and their ambitions. This is very true. Now, I'm going to skip down and at least go into some of this highlighted area or sidebar, which is titled Making Playable Societies. Every society needs to be built to serve the creator's purpose. For recreational world builders, that purpose might be one of building the most quote-unquote realistic verisimilitudinous culture possible in a Barkarian opus of world building. For working GMs, the purpose is often much more modest and much more pragmatic. This means you need to be ready to embrace assumptions and commonplaces. If your society violates the ordinary expectations of real-life history or social organizations, there has to be some kind of immediate payoff to it in adventure possibilities or play streamlining. Exoticism for exoticism's sake just makes more work for you at the table. And basically what they're saying is, right, is we all presume certain things, right? If there's a king, we might presume that there's some kind of nobility around them supporting a feudal type structure of some kind. May not be exactly feudal, might be more like I don't know, like in other, I mean, obviously there were kings that were not of feudal kingdoms, but we might think of some kind of structure of nobles from the very royal houses down to the more petty nobility, et cetera, et cetera. If for some reason that's lacking or is completely different, there needs to be kind of a payoff for why it's not working, and presumably something that's actionable. And if it's not going to be actionable, then again, that kind of context, so that it kind of makes sense, because we're using words, we're using English, right, or whatever language you're using, and part of that is we make assumptions, so that we put our players in the context of, okay, you're visiting this kingdom, or you're in the throne room of this kingdom, right? You're going to have certain expectations in your brain about what is in a throne room. You think, okay, a couple of thrones, maybe on some kind of raised platform, and the GM may say some of this, but you're also going to think, okay, there's going to be various ministers, and there's going to be maybe a priest or a bishop or some high-ranking, at least one high-ranking religious authority. Then there might be the queen or the king's partner, or whatever, a consort. Then there's going to be some other royalty, and there's going to be other lords potentially, and ladies and people of the court, right? So you walk into that, you're building out this picture of it. If my picture as a GM is drastically different, then at some point it's going to go like, the players are going to go, what? Like, really? There's the king is there, and it's like, otherwise the place is completely empty and there's no guards, there's no nothing. Doesn't make sense. Or it could even be something like stranger. And if you're going to have that, then yeah, there should be some kind of payoff to that, either in knowledge, in opportunity, or something. Let's see. Yeah, ancient German sword laws come to mind. Yep. There's lots of different ways things to do there. So you want to make sure that there's some kind of payoff in some way. And let's see what else I have to say. Okay. When you build the organization and cultural stylings of a society, start with the most basic, ordinary, commonplace expressions of your choices or random table results. If the roles say the society is based on dynastic houses, then start with a medieval fantasy standard collection of noble houses. If it says the society values martial might, then haul in schoolboy simple echoes of Sparta or Viking raiders. If it takes more than 2 sentences to reference how that part of the society works to a listener, you're making it too esoteric, right? And again, what we're going back to is this context. We have, like I was saying in my very kind of fumbly, mumbly way, you want that context. If you say it's militaristic, your players are going to think, they might think Vikings, they might think Sparta, they might think feudal Japan. They're going to come with that image. You want to use that as much as possible. You want to say, hey, it's like Sparta, but maybe it's got this twist. If you're running into, it's like nothing you've ever seen before, or it's like Sparta, but there's 800 twists, then just for practical purposes, okay, you may want to figure out some other way of doing it. Maybe it's not really militaristic. Maybe as you're writing out, well, it's like Sparta, but this. Really, it's more like Athens with a touch of Sparta, or it's more like something else. You want to use those things to your advantage. You want to play into them as much as possible, not to make your game world necessarily just Earth 2 that's just filled with cast-offs from Earth or carbon copies of pre-existing Earth cultures, but you want to use as much as possible our knowledge, such as it is, whether it's through actual scholarship or most likely through popular fiction, of these different cultures, so you don't have to do all that legwork. If I say, well, it's medieval, feudal England, except the women are in charge instead of the men, for the most part, right? You say, okay, that makes sense. Like I can just flip that one thing, and all right, great, I'm set. Because really, what I want you to get into the mode. I'm not just doing it to do it. I'm not just trying to make it loopy to be loopy. Right? It's like, okay, I can get in the mode. And as pure world building, yeah, that's not as interesting. And maybe you want to make it completely different and make it completely alien and completely something we've never seen before. Then you got to do a lot more work to get your players into that mode if you're going to run that as an adventure, because you're going to have to do some explaining of everything to start out, because nothing's going to match up with what our expectations are. Whereas if you're just trying to get up and running and your main thing is, I just want to get people in this world and I want to get them moving, then just saying, hey, think of, feudal Japan, right? Except instead of samurai, we call them something else. And we don't in our Bushido, they don't have a sense of Bushido, but they have this other thing instead, right? You think medieval Japan, but replace Bushido with the Pirates Code. Like, bam. It's like a log line. If you're familiar with screenplay writing, there's this idea of the log line, which is like 1 or 2 sentences, like a 30-second spiel you give somebody. It's usually it starts off often with trying to give you sort of the sense of it's this except with that, or it's this merged with that. And it's good to, even if you never comes up directly with your players, what you'll never say to them in the game, it's like Samurai, but with the Pirates Code instead of Bushido. Just you knowing it in the back of your brain, it'll be easy to make those connections. And then you can, then flesh it out from there. Once you have a simple, navigable, playable framework, you should go back and start weirding it up and adding unique fantasy aspects or elements to your society, right? So you start off with something everybody can kind of glom onto quickly. Then you can build up all the strangeness around it, or as much strangeness as you want. Almost every one of these flourishes should be attached to adventure hooks or societal conflicts that the PCs can get involved in. And this kind of goes back to the idea of being efficient with your time. If you're creating this stuff, the most efficient thing to do is to concentrate on the stuff that your party can and will interact with. So if you're going to have all this weirdness with dynastic houses, if the party is never going to be if the party is going to spend, you're starting off at level 1 and they have no entree to these dynastic houses, any kind of esoteric stuff the dynastic houses are doing, kind of weirdness there, is just lost. Maybe you want to add a little flair from it. So if they go to there's a holiday festival in the town, you want to have one of these dynastic houses do something. So maybe you introduce something a little bit there. But then again, if you're kind of putting that in the game and playing through it, then you want your players to be able to interact with it in some way. It becomes an adventurable, interactive element, and not just bits of kind of world building that are just kind of there hanging out for only their own purpose. Let's see. Chat is quiet, so I can keep on keeping on. The best framework, this basic framework also helps a GM deal with the inevitable awkward question and unexpected angle that always crop up during play. The PCs may suddenly ask about some facet of the society that the GM hasn't thought out yet, or make some assumptions about local laws or values that may or may not be true. By starting from a basic framework, the GM can fall back on those ordinary assumptions to fill in the blanks that they haven't personally scripted out, right? So if you're starting out from Samurai with the Pirates Code, and someone asks you some question, well, what about, because I don't really think about much of Samurai at sea. So maybe they're like, okay, well, the like, wow, the Samurai have a lot of boats. That's interesting, because I don't think of Samurai at sea, but you can fall back on, well, they're also great naval blah, 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 because they have this great pirate aspect of their character that makes them sort of samurai, that merge between sort of samurai and pirates. Think about where the Pirates Code stuff comes from. Maybe that comes from them having more of a naval background than traditional samurai. And actually, I don't know anything about traditional samurai, and if they did a lot on the ocean. So apologies for if I am playing down some important aspect of samurai workings or culture. But yeah, so, you could fall back on, and if you didn't have anything for it and you didn't have any big boats, then you just fall back on, well, this is what samurai were like in Japan. So I'll just stick with that, at least for now. But it's that taking advantage of stuff that you know and taking advantage of stuff that your party knows to try to make things on a practical level smooth as silk. All right. Now we're getting some more tables here. So we got some physical appearances, right? What did the average person look like? I don't know if I need to read down all these, but we get some tables, one for skin color, one for hair color and texture, one for eye color, typical builds, common adornments, and then I'll read through the physical quirks and traits, maybe. This is a D20 table. They have an extra eye somewhere. They have some extra limbs. They have pronounced sexual dimorphism. They got patches of feathers, scales, fur, or the like. They have a tail of some sort. They have wings of some sort. Their skin has an unusual texture. They are marked by a sigil. Their sexes look very similar to outsiders. They have a scent, a particular scent. They have a peculiar voice in some way. They either have fewer or more fingers or toes. They have some kind of animalistic feature. They have one or more manipulatory tentacles. They have light-emitting organs or skin. Their mouths are fanged or tusked. They have some kind of alien feature, one of those outsider features. They have some interesting or different proportions. They don't show age the way others do, or you roll twice and take the blend. So there you go. So you get some nice inspiration if you want to get a few of those. Some of them are more off the beaten path than others. That's all good, right? We don't want everybody to be super unusual. Now we get to the values of the society. Societies will tend to esteem certain values, holding them as emblematic of their people or specially blessed by their gods. Institutions will honor these values, folk heroes will act in ways to further them, and the rightness of decisions will be judged on how well they conform to these virtues. All right, this stuff I like. So I always feel like if you're going to do something, and again, on a slight divergence, if you're going to do something like ditch alignment, which most people like to do, especially in the modern game, but I think even in OSR circles, I think some OSR games have ditched alignment altogether, or if you're treating them like kind of cosmic teams to which there's no real good or evil access to it. I think having players establish what they believe in is a good thing. Some kind of code. And whether they're good or bad. I think too many people look at evil characters as if they're just codeless. And very often, the most interesting evil characters have a code. Sometimes even a rigid code. That's not what, it's not the lack of the code that makes them evil. It's their application of things and potentially how they see things in their, right, in this code, right? An evil samurai still follows the code of the samurai. They just, it's their application of that or their lack of potentially other types of morality that makes them evil compared to the good samurai or whatever, right? The evil knight versus the good knight. The evil knight may hold up the knightly virtues, but maybe reads them in such a narrow way that it causes them to be, or that's what makes them evil, as opposed to a good knight that is very expansive in their readings, right? So you think of an evil knight might look at certain ethnic cultures and say, I don't consider you people, therefore I don't have to protect you. You're not innocent, you're guilty, or you're whatever, so I can do whatever I want with you. Whereas a good knight says, no, all creatures who haven't shown themselves to be evil in their own individual deeds are covered until they prove themselves otherwise. So it puts them on a collision course when these different creatures and everything's in play. Lol Vapor Maven says, good to see you. Hey, yeah, good to see you too. Oh, this is Tank Pow under his other name again. I got to get those straight. Oh, ordering a hard copy this week. Cool. I don't know how long they take. I've seen some kind of hard copy and picture of it. It looks really nice, but I don't know if that's from drive-thru or wherever. I don't know if they have different deals for different copies. But yeah, that's cool. I'm curious to see. I've only seen the picture of the hard copy, but it looks of really nice quality. It's nice to see one at one point. I don't know if these will ever. Some of the stuff never makes it in any kind of gaming stores. I don't think so. You don't get a chance to really feel it in your hands. You just kind of have to order it, which suboptimal, but that's the world and the way it works these days. All right, so we got a bunch of these values, all going all the way through D100. I'm just going to read a few of these, skipping over some. So you got, individual rights and freedom of action, courage and valiance, eloquence and social expertise, raw strength, education, beauty and charm, conquest, ethnic purity of blood and culture, subtlety, honor and integrity, submission to authority, faithfulness towards friends, domination, loyalty to one's friends, vengeance, magical prowess, some kind of caste membership or bloodline. Let's see, humanistic reason and rational religion, leadership and charisma in the group, pacifism, or some kind of societal superiority. So there you go. And there's obviously a bunch of those. I'm just not reading them all, but I think we get the idea for the kind of things that on a society level. And by the way, this is also where you can obviously drill down to individual characters, if they're from the society, or NPCs, and how do they differ from the values of the society as a whole, right? I think that you think of like Drizzt being sort of the classic example, someone that's gone against all the societal norms of traditional drow culture. But, the pacifist in a military society, or a militarist in a more passive society, that kind of thing. In the society of the blind, the one-eyed king is, the one-eyed man is king. All right, that kind of thing too. I suppose it could be a physical difference. We get some notes on organization and aesthetics. So organizing, we've got a table for major units of social identity. Got 20 of them. I'll just read all these out. Extended family, religious factions, province-based identity, ethnic membership, guild or trade-specific groups, local communities, educational ties, patron-client relationships, hereditary loyalty, trade guilds, dynastic lineages, ancient hero ancestor lineages, castes of hereditary workers, inheritance of ancient body modifications. That's interesting. Astrologically determined birth groups, war bands or other kind of service groups, voluntary brotherhoods, far-flung clans of affiliated families, noble blood or lack thereof, and then ideological groups. Whoops. Sorry, I hit my mouse accidentally. And then we have some examples. I'll just read a couple of these. We have I'm not sure what the D20 is for. I guess in case you want to just take an example from our history and drop it in. So you get things like Victorian England, pre-Columbian North American tribes, the Mali Empire, unified dynastic China, imperial or republican Rome, Greek city-states, the Aztec Empire, post-Islamic Arabia, Polynesian Islanders, Incan Empire, right? So if you just need something, pull one of those out, drop it in. Let's see if there's any particular notes in the text about these. I think it's just more... here, I'll read about aesthetics. I think that's the more interesting and maybe complicated one. It's impossible for a GM to define everything about a culture that might conceivably become important during play. Small details of dress, architecture, the titles of office officials, and other minutiae might suddenly become critical when the GM needs a particular fact at hand. Rather than trying to formulate a heroically Barkerian level of detail for your society, the easiest workaround is to take an existing historical society as a template. Whenever you need an answer for a particular question, provide whatever answer roughly matches the way that the chosen template society did it. Right. So again, if I had gone with, all right, this culture is samurais meets pirate code. Someone comes with a question. I don't know what it is, but I have two elements of the society that I know. Pirate code, and then presumably some kind of piracy coming from some sort of naval background, and then samurai, right? And drilling down into more things, what is maybe the stronger influence? I think in my case, it clearly is the Japanese side of it. So if there are questions about what to do in certain circumstances, if it doesn't fit something that's in the pirate's code, then I'm going to look down and say, okay, well, what do I think, roughly speaking, it would work if we were in samurai, medieval, Japan? Or I guess depending on what era of samurai you want. So I would find that out and I would use that as my answer. And of course, write all this stuff down so that it's consistent, because you're going to get these questions more than once, potentially spaced out over a multitude of sessions. So when you come up with one of these things about here's how the society works in this instance to answer a question, write it down so you don't have to try to think of it again, and B, when they come back, it works the same way and you don't get some of those, last time we were here, it worked like this. And then you're sort of scrambling again. So keep that in mind. I'm just moving my mic a little bit. Just in my face in a bad way. All right. Now we get to the government. I'm going to read through the bullet points here. When building, first I'll read the intro, then the bullet points. When building a government for a nation, tribe, or other polity, it's important to keep in mind the purpose of your work. While there's a great deal of pleasure to be had in world building for world building's sake, a working GM should keep in mind three fundamental purposes in building any government. So here we go. More from, and I don't know if I feel like on the one hand you could say he's kind of beating over our heads this idea of separating out world building for fun versus world building for practical purposes, but I don't think it's necessarily bad for a couple of reasons. One, I think often you might be coming back to these pages as a resource, as opposed to just kind of a one-time read through. And so I think he's writing some of the stuff to reinforce it. So when we're reading it all through at once, it seems like, okay, you're saying this every time there's a section. You're saying, hey, remember the difference between world building for world building and world building for working GMing. But if we were coming back to this after several months away, maybe we've slipped into bad habits, or bad habits from one perspective, and it's a nice reminder. And secondly, there are real differences, but I think that this is clearly written, it seems like, to reinforce ideas, because we're in a part of the book, this part of the book at least, could very much be a resource, right? So they want to keep reminding us of some of these fundamental issues. All right, Terrence, if world building isn't fun for you, why are you GMing? Well, I think some people do like to just GM material, already written material, or already created worlds. I think it's fair to say that not every GM has to enjoy world building. I do think that probably most GMs do enjoy it to some degree, because even when you're running pre-built things, there tends to be some element of world building that you are doing, even if it's only to flesh out the stuff around whatever material you're using, because no source book is going to be absolutely authoritative on everything across everywhere. No, certainly an adventure isn't. So they're going to tend to have to do some world building somewhere, even if it's around the edges. But I think not every GM is into it. But of course, if you're not into it, then you're probably not reading this book, or you've skipped over all this stuff. Still, I think the really important part is not that most GMs don't find, or that even any GMs don't find world building fun, though I don't doubt they exist. I think the issue is separating the world building that I'm doing because it's fun versus practical world building, and understanding why they're different, and understanding why there's some stuff that I may want to do because world building is just fun may either not be productive or could actually be counterproductive to the actual practical application of that world building. And I think he's continually trying to reinforce that balance of, this might be great if you're just world building for yourself and you want to fill reams and reams of notebooks with all kinds of stuff. That's great, but trying to use it in the game fundamentally and practically, keep these things in mind, right? So let's get into these bullet points. Governments should provide adventure hooks. I think that's going to be a recurring theme. All the stuff you're doing here should somehow feed into adventuring possibilities somehow. They shouldn't all be closed boxes without seams or cracks or openings. Governments should provide guidelines for reacting to PC actions, right? What is the framework of responses to PC things? So when you're sitting there and you're looking at it and you're going, hey, my PCs just went murder hobo and butchered an entire village, what would they do? You should have some ready answers to that question. That's actually one of those things that I'm always surprised comes up, because I think we know what to do. If you're a local lord and some party rampaged through and killed everybody in the town that you're supposed to be protecting, it's pretty obvious what to do. I think that question comes almost more because GMs are reluctant to do, or they want someone to tell them it's okay to then send the posse after your players if they did that. But, right, know what to do. Let's see. Governments should fit the thematic goal of the nation. So if your government is militaristic, if your society is militaristic, what's governing that society should make sense. It shouldn't be some weird thing, unless there's a really good reason for why the priests of peace are controlling the society that you've decided is super warlike, or they're super warlike, and not only are the priests of peace in command, but there's so much bureaucracy that they can ever actually go to war, because all these different areas of the government have to all agree with super majorities to do anything, and so that the military constantly has their hands tied. Like, that just wouldn't play out. How would that work? The military, the militaristic people who are the majority of the society at least would just rebel unless there were reasons why they couldn't. And then what are those reasons? And that might help, right? But that should, whatever the themes that you've established about this society should hold up in their government. It should make sense. Now we get into governmental I was going to say destiny, which seemed really cool, but it's actually density. Governmental density. We have low density governments that tend to exist in tribal societies, small fiefs, compact institutions such as monasteries, or poor nations that produce very little surplus for the elites to collect. So if you don't have a lot of goods and services, you don't have a lot of stuff, you can't really support a huge ruling class that's basically sitting, relying on everyone else to do the work for them. Everyone's got to be doing work. So you're going to end up with a very low level of bureaucracy. The culture society that people just cannot support a large set of just bureaucrats running around pushing papers and pencils, if they've invented pencils yet. Medium density governments are found in richer polities or tribal nation states where there's enough surplus to feed a thin layer of functionaries. Even in these nations, however, usually no more than 1 in 300 people are actually officials or permanently mustered soldiers. And then you have high density government, is the sort that we're most familiar to as modern folk, being a fair description of many of the modern nations of the world. Perhaps as many as 1 in 100 or even more are either professional soldiers, clerks, functionaries, or other state-employed servants, right? So I do think that gets overplayed a lot of times in games where you'll have some small town and it's got, or even just a city of sort of a small kingdom, but you've got all kinds of different functionaries running around. It just doesn't really make sense. Oh, you've got the people who run the sewers, and there's the people who run this, and the people who run that, and the people who run that. It's like, well, you have more people running things than you probably have people actually using the stuff. But I think, I don't know if it's kind of the influence of sort of steampunk or just modern society looking back and saying, of course, there has to be a full-time post office and a full-time cart driver's license network and full-time traffic cops and full-time sewage cleaners and full-time this. But the realities are that a lot of that stuff ends up being just ad hoc or just, what would the word be? It would be sort of freelance kind of work that when it's there, you hire out to do it. And when it's not, you don't, or you're just bivouacked to do it if there's great need at some point. But, it is a fantasy world. So if you're going to do that, just try to make it make sense as much as possible. And then we have a ruling authority. Got a nice little table there. You can have a single monarch, a monarch and some underkings. I like the idea of an underking. A group of approximate equals or a large number of small rulers. Of course, you could add, subtract, multiply those as much as possible. I used to have in a sci-fi game, I had in the sci-fi game, my friend ran for years and years and years. It's kind of been on a long hiatus, which is a sort of a bummer in itself, but I'm not there to play locally anymore. And COVID and people, even before COVID, kind of people getting older, kids getting older, family situations changing, kind of made the game, just harder to get together than it used to be. But we all had our own sort of star system spanning empires or nations that we played. Most of them tended to follow kind of fancy tropes in terms of having emperors and things like that, as opposed to republics or democracies or things like that. I'm not sure why. I had the only good aligned empire in the mix, but at some point, recognizing everyone else was playing evil empires and being somewhat afraid when I would get, not afraid, but wary if we were having sort of interplayer episodes at the table. You get invited to someone's something or other, and it's on their homeworld or in their space somewhere. I created this post of the vice emperor that I would send out, which is a little bit of kind of me having fun, sort of snubbing the other person's like, no, my emperor's not going to your podunk wedding, funeral, whatever. I'm sending the vice emperor. But something tickled me about the vice emperor, and the underking. Definitely, one or more underkings definitely is also kind of a funny idea to me. Juan Cholo, hey Juan, how you doing? In medieval times, in big cities, the city watch of different areas would be made up of volunteers from the local guilds who would watch the guild areas. Right. Yep. And of course, in something like the Wild West, right, they'd have a few deputies, right, a handful less, and then you would engage the posse when you needed something serious happened, right? Or feudal times, the local lord, if they had any knights or wards beneath them, they would call them up. If it happened on a higher level, then they would have to bring their household knights with them, right? Because there was not a lot of standing armies for unless they were super organized, right? The Romans could have standing armies and they could support them, but a lot of cultures especially I think in the medieval period, right? They couldn't afford it. So it was all about who you could get for some kind of time between planting and harvesting, basically, that you could get for a couple of months, send them out there. But I think even the Romans, I don't know, because of absolute necessity, at least early on, or maybe towards the end of the Republic, or in the Republic era, they were supposed to disband their legions, and then famously, some of them stopped disbanding them. Okay, so we got the ruling authority. Now we get some ruling class stuff. We have D12 examples, just a couple of them: hereditary nobility, powerful merchant princes, colonizer viceroys, warlords, military leaders, proletariat, peasantry, or artisans, right? So these would be some examples of ruling classes. And now we have a table of sources of legitimacy. What is their claim to being in charge? They've just always been the rulers. They were wiser, more virtuous. They're just stronger militarily. They were chosen by the gods. They were chosen by the populace. They were loved for their goodness, etc., etc. That's another kind of D12. And then we get some servants of the ruling order. Another table, we get some institutions and agents of control. I like that term. Agents of control. Subordinate lords, obedient bureaucracies, magically empowered enforcers. They don't even have to be magically empowered, but I suppose that's nothing wrong with them actually being magically empowered. A major religion, the judiciary, I guess just brutes on the government leash, divine beings, etc. So you get some interesting ideas for if you want to think about, well, how did some of these rulers maintain control on their nations? And now we get to some forms of rulership. We have two tables, one for single rulers, one for multiple rulers, right? So you have a king or queen over lesser lords, an autocrat with non-noble officials, a president chosen by electors, a warlord recognized by the strongest. Or with multiple rulers, you get stuff like nobly born peers, senior-most figures, chosen elects from a ruling class, etc. So this is an interesting section. It's called Diseases of Rule. The final step in creating the government is to roll or pick a substantial problem that it's facing or a driving ambition that is causing conflict within its membership. This problem will help create adventure hooks involving the government. Maybe the PCs are caught up in the struggle as unhappy victims or enlisted by a faction to help gain its end. All right, so there's something wrong. There's trouble in paradise. There's a fly in the soup, a fly in the ointment. They give us a D12 chart or table. Current struggles. I'll just riff through these. The ruler's trying to crush a too powerful lord. Ministers are trying to usurp power. A grand scheme has gone horribly wrong. External diplomacy has bungled something. There is a usurper that's controlling a major power. Foreign rivals are backing malcontents. A different class demands a share of the rule or of ruling. The existing ruling class wants more power. A disfavored class is being oppressed. Popular discontent is destroying legitimacy. The prior ruler's incompetence is still harming the current state, and the heir is unacceptable to many. So lots of good things in there. Oh, Juan Cholo is back. Let's see. I had an idea for a land of tinker gnomes / goblins. The presidential race was a literal race. The loser would be forced for a 2-year period to be president instead of inventing. Well, that's interesting. So it's definitely a that concept. It's the sort of like the people who want to rule should be the last people to rule, and you want the people who don't want to rule. I wonder how long it takes that race to do, because I think each one would be trying to lose. Oh no, but I guess in this case you have to win to win. So how many people competing? Is it like a tournament of non-champions? How does that work? Like if you win your pool, you're out, and everyone left goes to the next round, and winners keep going out, and the pool keeps going until finally the biggest loser is the winner. Well, I like it. It's kind of I like turning things on its head, but in a way that you can instantly visualize in some way. Cool beans, Juan Cholo. I'm down with that. And here we get some more one roll government details. We had one roll, I think, terrain details before, so now we're getting a whole bunch of tables. going through, and we'll see. Well, let me just sneak a peek what's next. Okay, good, because this is the last page for governmental stuff, so this will be the last page for this stream, and we'll pick up with the next element tomorrow. One show says would only work for a group of non-human inventors. Why only non-humans? Oh, because it's I was thinking in terms of a race instead of having like a physical race, something where it's you're building some kind of machine. You're building some kind of like a Pinewood Derby, but of course make them all kinds of crazy, loopy, gnomish devices. That's at least that's how I picture in my head. Not necessarily like here are these goblins and gnomes and they go on a sprint, but that they have to create some kind of machine or device or something, and then that machine either they're in it racing it, or they're piloting it personally, or they're sending them off to race, or like a demolition derby or something of that nature, right? That's what I pictured in my brain. But and Juan Cholo, feel free to use it. This is my gift to you. Take this wonderful idea that you actually gave and I just riffed on, but consider it mine, and now I'm giving it back to you. All right, one roll government details. Fleshing out kind of the framework that we built out so far, hopefully. How established is the current leader? Either they're kind of not at all, or they very much are. It's a D6 table. Then we have a D8 table. What problems do their ministers have? We get a D8 worth of schemes. They're out of touch. There was a bloody purge. Enemy forces have allies. They're distracted. Allies amongst them, right? They're infiltrated by enemies. Leadership ignores them, that sort of thing. What is the strength of the government? Efficient bureaucracy. The populace is totally